21 years of experience managing a private foundation, working with nonprofits, and engaging in community development. Dr. Reed has conducted cutting-edge academic research on private philanthropy and human behavior in organizations, providing important new insights regarding philanthropic practices in private settings and opportunities for managerial intervention. He has developed highly innovative interventions for healthcare management, behavioral health, human services, and public education. For the past couple of decades, Dr. Reed has managed a private foundation focused on education reform, community and economic development, social services, and innovative programs aimed at enhancing quality of life for area residents on a regional basis. Previously, he had a successful career in turning around underperforming healthcare institutions and managing a network of hospitals, including both acute care and behavioral health facilities. Dr. Reed has several years of experience in designing innovative behavioral health interventions for at-risk populations, with particular focus on people suffering long-term structural dislocation. Dr. Reed has earned several degrees, including a PhD from Oklahoma State University, OPM certification from the Harvard Business School, an MBA from Santa Clara University, and an AV degree from the University of Redlands. He presently lives in Hobbs, New Mexico, and has served on many national, regional, and local boards and committees focused on public policy, effective philanthropy, healthcare delivery, educational reform, and drug addiction, alcoholism-related prevention and treatment. Dr. Reed has also served on several corporate boards. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank Dr. Torres for the opportunity. I want to thank the HSA for co-sponsoring this.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank Jimena for getting me here, because I would have been lost. No way I would have found it. But it's a real honor to be here today. And I have to tell you, I have a real soft spot in my heart for social work. I was a behavioral science student for a long time. I actually have enough undergraduate units in the behavioral sciences for at least 3 degrees. But ended up actually graduating with a degree in management and then subsequently with additional business degrees. But my heart's here. Now, I have to tell you that personally, it was social work that gave me my son, because I adopted a little boy who was a ward of the state, who was 6.5 years old, and he had been starved, beaten, and neglected for his first 6.5 years of his life, and at 6.5 could not read one word. Was qualified for special ed, and instead ended up an honor grad at high school and in college, and now has an MSW, as a licensed master social work student. He is still a student in that he's now earning an MBA and is thinking about pursuing a PhD. But he is now overseeing child welfare issues for the state of New Mexico, which is just amazing. An incredibly talented young man. Took everything that I could to keep him focused on his studies, because he looks like a cross between Ricky Martin and Alex Rodriguez. Was a very talented athlete, and is an incredible charmer. But we owe all of this to social work, and so I'm really, really glad to be here. I'm going to be talking about a blending today of some research projects that I did, just to be able to put some conceptual framework around issues related to leadership, both from the foundation side and from the grantee side, in managing foundation-grantee relations. But I don't want to limit it to that. I'm going to have a few comments, and then I really hope that we can have some discussion, and maybe you'll have questions. I get the opportunity to be here today to talk about this subject matter in this particular session. I also get a chance to come tonight to Jennifer Battle's class, and I'm really excited about that. We're going to be talking about radically different things there. And then tomorrow I'm speaking at Rice on the Center for Philanthropy, specifically in a much more detailed way on my research in philanthropy. So I'm excited about that as well. But Houston is a place that is very special to me. I lived here in the mid-'80s. It has grown a lot ever since I got out. It really took off. So I was glad I could get out of the way. But in terms of an agenda for today, I want to talk a little bit about what are private foundations. There's an awful lot of discussion in this political cycle about foundations, isn't there? And some of the discussion is confused because private foundations are not necessarily what they're talking about. What specifically does the literature say about private foundations? There's some extrapolation that I will offer you from my 2 research projects that I think relate to it. Then we're going to review these leadership strategies, and then I want to go into the more meaningful part, which is what do you want? So please eat plenty of pizza and be ready and nurtured for the more important part of this, which is the last part of our discussion. Okay? All right. So there's a big foundation world out there, right? And there are many, many different kinds of foundations. So it's probably useful to talk about what are those types of foundations. And specifically my comments are related to foundations in the U.S. So there are 4 categories of foundations. Okay. Private foundations, also known as independent foundations, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the Houston Endowment, which you might be familiar with. Community foundations, which would be like the Texas Community Foundation. Corporate foundations, which maybe the Chevron Foundation. In this case, I've listed the J.P. Morgan Chase Foundation. And then there are public foundations like the National Science Foundation. Okay. What differentiates private foundations from these others is that private foundations are endowment-driven organizations, not fundraisers. They usually have an event. It could be 1 or it could be 2, rarely more than 2 events of funding that result in creating these foundations, and then they essentially are responsible for managing their endowment, investing the assets, generating a rate of return that supports their grant-making activities, their administrative expenses, their investment-related expenses. You can have endowments in community foundations. Some community foundations do have endowments, but by and large, they are big fundraising organizations perpetually trying to raise money from a variety of new donors to be able to support their initiatives. Corporate foundations are typically supported by the corporations that they're companion to, and they're usually funded as a result of profitability in a given year. So if they don't have a very profitable year, they might not give anything or give very little to their corporate foundation, and so their activities tend to go up and down according to the fortunes of the company. Public foundations are, by and large, the beneficiaries of allocations through legislative processes. So again, to the extent that the government is able to allocate a lot of funds to them, they're able to support a lot of activity. Otherwise, they might not. So, in terms of private philanthropy, private foundations represent 82% of the funds controlled by all foundations in the United States. So they are by overwhelmingly the big dog in the room when it comes to it. And they're about a $600 billion industry in the U.S. Okay, that may be surprising to you. But what's really surprising is that if you measured them in terms of their gross domestic product, it would be 20th out of 230 nations in their scale. So in the United States, private foundations are a pretty big deal. So what does the literature say about private foundations? They're not very complimentary. They say, we're incredibly difficult to access. Anybody ever tried to access a private foundation here? Raise your hand. How easy was it? Not very easy, right? All right. My research tomorrow is going to talk more about that and why. They are an insider-controlled industry. And the literature says we're not particularly responsive to external constituents. So we tend to be very internally focused, right? Okay. So that's what the literature says about us. Okay. Here's what grantees specifically say. And this may be some of your experiences. Again, foundations difficult to access. That there is a real problem around distribution of power in the relationship between foundations and grantees. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not going to give you, because of limited time, I'm not going to go into a lot of methods in my research, but I do have slides at the back in case there are questions about methods, including questions about participants in the research, etc. But specifically, grantees or nonprofits often say that private foundations they experience as being disrespectful, that they have their own entitlement-related behavior. There's really one very interesting article in the Stanford Social Innovations where Michelle Twan talks about what she calls the dance of deceit, which is how both foundations and grantees seem to be deceitful one to the other. And in that particular case, she talks about the fact that grant officers of private foundations, which are the frontline staff of private foundations, act as if it's their money. And, they say if you go to work for a private foundation, the coffee's always hot. The carpet's always red. The jokes you tell are the funniest jokes people have ever heard, right? And no matter how stupid they think your ideas are, when you go to talk about them, they're the smartest they've ever heard, right? It's this power equation, okay? And so it disrupts the relationships. So there was a private foundation executive and a nonprofit executive that really enjoyed hunting. We're out in the West. This is a gun area, lots of hunting, that kind of stuff. I'm not a hunter, I'm not a fisher. I never got down that path. But they went to Alaska to hunt. And they went deep, deep back into Alaska, and so they had to take this floater plane. You know what these floater planes are? When you land on the water, they had to be dropped back there and left for a couple of weeks. And then the plane comes back to pick them up again, and the pilot comes out, and they said, well, we were pretty successful. We got 20 elk over here that need to be loaded in that plane. And the pilot looks at 20 elk. He looks at the plane, looks at the 20 elk, looks at the plane, he says, they'll never fit in there. How will we ever get back? And the nonprofit executive says, listen, we've been doing this for years. We do this every time. We have the same size plane, same number of elk. He said, just take off slowly over the water and everything will be fine. And the pilot said, well, I don't want to second guess you. I mean, obviously you know what you're doing, right? So they load up all these elk and they get in the plane and they start to take off over the water and they're slowly getting up. The engines are working hard, they're really working hard. And they start to get some elevation and then all of a sudden the engines cut out and they crash. And the nonprofit exec gets out from under one of the wings, looks at the foundation and says, oh my God, where are we? The foundation exec says, about 100 yards from where we crashed last year. Albert Einstein says the definition of insanity is what? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Okay? All right, so that's the dance of deceit that Michelle Twan was talking about. All right? Is that just simply having sort of a random exposure to all foundations and treating them the same is not likely to get a very good result. My research shows that the way that you approach private foundations is radically different than how you approach the other three kinds of foundations. And how they respond is radically different as well. All right, so I've got two different research projects that I'm going to talk about. And I think maybe, how many people are involved in the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance? Okay, good. So you want to be a nonprofit leader?
No, I've heard of it. I'm in Jennifer Battle's class.
Okay, oh great. So you're going to be there tonight?
Yeah.
Oh, this will be fun. Okay, I'm looking forward to this. I'm going to give you some pretty radical exposure tonight to some things that clearly out of the 70s. So one of my research projects was a quantitative research project that actually got presented at the Academy of Management, and I was really kind of excited about that. The other is a qualitative study. Okay? This one, the quantitative, is looking at entitlement antecedents. Okay? The qualitative study looked specifically at private philanthropy. Okay? So I had, with respect to my quantitative study, I had 157 supervisor employee diets. And what was really cool is that I used two colleges. So I used faculty and staff, and it was really interesting. With the interpretive research, I focused on 33 foundations, 16 grantees, 14 of which were paired with those 33 foundations. So really interesting insight, and resulted in some findings that are radically different from what's in the literature. Okay, so here's what I learned in the, and this is really important. If you're ever going to be in leadership, you need to know about this. Okay, This is what got presented to Academy of Management. If you think you've had some record of performance and some level of influence, and here's the key, you can be delusional about it. It doesn't have to be a reality, okay? You can be as self-deceived as you like. That combination will result in an elevation in entitlement, okay? If the entitlement goes up, guess what goes down? Organizational citizenship behavior, and what's not also in there is pro-social behavior. So in other words, you become essentially useless to others, right? So how many times are we in organizations when we're looking for a superstar to bring in? We bring the superstar in, and then all of a sudden it disrupts the culture of the organization, and everything goes to hell in a handbasket, right? Because they can't work with others. So if you're in a leadership role, and you bring in somebody who thinks, whether they are or not, that they're a superstar, you better have some kind of intervention strategy to be able to bring them into the fold without disrupting your culture, or what's going to happen is they're going to end up taking away from your environment rather than adding to it. Now, of course, there are mediators, like, for example, humility. I had a chance to fund the 2 largest endowed chairs in the state of the history of Texas, at Texas Tech in the College of Engineering. And we brought in 2 National Academy scholars. And they are 2 of the most humble people in the world, and yet they are the superstars in energy and in water-related issues internationally, globally. Okay? And so they don't fit this model. So you could screen for that, okay? But, so why is this relevant to this subject today? Well, that would suggest that there might be entitlement-related behavior among foundation founders, families, trustees, and among foundation frontline employees. Because what did I say a moment ago? My IQ went up 50 points the moment I went to work for a private foundation, because nobody was ever honest with me again. No matter how stupid they thought my ideas were, they told me that I was the smartest person in the room. And so eventually what happens is I start to believe that delusion and start thinking that, well, I really am that smart. And because of the fact that I am involved with a resource-intense organization, I've got more power. So I've got more influence. Therefore, my entitlement goes up. And it's amazing. I've seen this happen so many times. We get funders in the room with grantees. The grantees have all the information about what's really going on, where the real need is, where the real opportunity. Who's talking to us? The foundation folks. Okay? So this research suggests that that's likely to be the case. My foundation research, however, did not find that behavior, specifically with strategic grantees. So you have to ask yourself, what's a strategic grantee? Okay? And how do they become strategic? And that's the subject of this discussion today. The point is, and I'm going to be on a panel in Charleston in November with the head of the Center for Effective Philanthropy, whose research has opposite findings. So we're going to be point counterpoint. And he's going to talk about how, no, by God, foundations are too entitled, and they need to be brought down a couple of notches. And they're also going to talk about issues of transparency, which I'll talk about tomorrow. It all depends on your data, right? It all depends on who's your sample. Well, when you get into your sample, strategic grantees, they feel very differently about foundations than do nonprofits across the board. Okay? It's because of the fact that they enjoy a concept called partner philanthropy. This is where they become a real partner. It's a result of a set of interactive strategies that both nonprofits and foundations participate in that distribute power more evenly and also have a lot of value. I've been working for the last few years on a paper that I want to get published that focuses specifically on frontline employee relationships and inter-firm collaborations and looking at foundations. There's a lot of literature out there that talks about how frontline employees either cause inter-firm collaboration to work effectively or they completely undo it. And that's the kind of stuff you want to know about. And really effective nonprofits like United for Change, depend on collaboration. They have to collaborate increasingly in a resource-scarce environment. So they have to understand how to facilitate those collaborations in a way that cause and enable frontline employees to carry out the faith, the mission, and the intent of collaboration. Okay, so grantees have 3 specific strategies that I discovered in my research when they become strategic grantees. The first thing they seek to do is to improve access for the very reason we just talked about. And the way that they do that is, first of all, they take a very slow approach to working their relationships with private foundations. If you're focusing on United Way or on the Chevron Foundation or the Texas Community Foundation or a really, really large national private foundation, they tend to be very similar, then you just study their funding interests and you develop a proposal that responds and you just send it in. And you've got as good a chance as anybody, which is not much. But if it's a private foundation, you don't do that. You go spend time getting to know them. You want to develop a deep understanding of what their interests and their values are. So you literally go visit them, you spend time with them, get to know the principals, find out what really is important. Okay, that's called prospecting. The next thing you do is you achieve mission alignment. And this is not some trivial idea of just simply finding a way to reframe what you want to do within the context of what you've discovered as foundation interests. This is a really deep, rigorous process of trying to figure out who is interested in what you're interested in the private foundation world. And how do you communicate that in a way that is meaningful to them? Okay? And lastly, this is really, really important. They work on building trust with that private foundation or those private foundations. So that means that they build a relationship. Okay? They actually seek the counsel of these private foundations and say, look, you've done a lot of work in this area. Tell me what you've learned from your other grantee experiences. How can we benefit from that? There is an incredible commitment to candor in this relationship. If they get a grant and it doesn't work out, they say it exactly like it is, because they understand these private foundations want to know, did it work, did it not? They also want to learn, what can we know from this? And if a project did not achieve its objectives, but the result was an incredible learning experience, private foundations value that even more than a report that comes in later that says, well, we achieved all of the objectives that we stated as our goals for this particular project. Okay. So the other thing, too, is a willingness to be accountable and timely communication. So when I say accountable, that means we really want to share information with our partner foundations about what is and what is not happening, and we don't let them find out about either developments with the project or with the agency by reading the paper. They communicate, and private foundations have a high expectation of this. When this happens, what I was told universally is that grantees told me that private foundations were their funder of choice. They would rather work with private foundations once they achieve this status than any other funder, because they were willing to learn with them, because they were willing to experiment, they were willing to take risks. Interestingly enough, private foundations also had a 3-step process that we found out in this research in building relationships with strategic grantees. So the first is relationship building. And in this regard, they really focus on communicating respect, appreciation, and value. And by the way, that was really consistent in the interfirm collaboration literature. Somehow they intuitively figured this out, because nobody's yet connected the dots between that literature and foundation practice in any explicit way. And yet it was consistent across the spectrum. 33 out of 33 private foundations communicated exactly the same. And 14 out of 14 paired grantees communicated exactly the same thing. That the private foundations didn't just wait for grantees to come see them once the relationship was built. They went out to see them. They went out and did site visits. They wanted to see what was going on out there. That in this relationship building, private foundations who do not, remember earlier we said that they don't have exposure to outside kinds of influence? They're willing to make grants that would be too controversial for what I call public funders, because they're not out raising money. So they're not worried about being accountable to outside constituents. So they're free to decide, is this really an important thing to do or not an important thing to do? And they don't worry about the politics of it. They don't worry about the optics. So there were actually two examples that came up in the research in that regard. One, Planned Parenthood. Pretty divisive in political rhetoric, right? People tend to be on one side or the other, and a lot of public funders don't want to touch Planned Parenthood because of the controversies. They're afraid that it will affect their ability to do fundraising. Private foundations were free to decide whether they wanted to participate based on whether they thought there was good merit or not. Another one was Boy Scouts, because of the issue of homosexuality, and so there are a number of people that lined up either on one side saying, well, I'm not going to support the Boy Scouts because of their long-standing position, which has since been amended, or a number of people lined up on the other side. The foundation said, no, we're going to decide based on whether or not we think this makes sense or not. Right? The next thing was private foundations are inherently focused on the ANC impact. And this is part of that accountability by the grantees as well, is they embrace the notion of looking for ways to escalate impact. So, to get impact, foundations focus on building capacity with those strategic grantees. They really worry about whether those strategic grantees have the resources they need to be sustainable. So they look at helping them to build capacity. They are very flexible around how the relationship is structured, including reporting requirements. If reporting was established for the purposes of a grant that would make, that later the reality suggests that there should be a different kind of reporting. Private foundations were highly flexible and able to report down. Sometimes they provide more funding than what was actually requested, because their assessment was, well, there really was more money needed here in order to do this right. They also looked at providing intangible support. And in this case, they looked an awful lot like venture capitalists. Venture capitalists don't just put money in the firms. They look for firms where they can match their strategic assets with the opportunity set of a particular group that they want to invest in. So that sometimes they serve on the boards of those firms. They look to try to position them to be able to be connected to other capital sources, to be able to have greater access to markets. Foundations do the exact same thing. They bring other funders in, they bring in technical experts who can be helpful to their strategic grantees. So that's another way to enhance impact. And then lastly is partnership development. And in this regard, this idea of willingness to learn with grantees, a high tolerance for failure. It's what we learn that matters, not whether we achieve the stated goals. Did we make progress? Can we be more effective the next time that we do this? So that's how they look at this, but they also communicate concern not only for the welfare of the agencies that they work with, but the individual staff members. They find ways to communicate value in regards to them. So this is the path model that came out of that particular research. And you can see that we're talking about achieving access, looking at mission alignment, development of mutual trust. So here's where the grantee strategies fit in this path model. Okay. They have to be able to get to this point to become strategic grantees in the eyes of private foundations they're working with. This is where the foundation strategies come in, because the development of trust becomes a mutual experience. Both foundations and grantees participate in trust-building activities, the result of which is this concept of partnered philanthropy. Okay. So, this is your turn. Questions? What would you like to talk about?
Okay. So, Harry, really, some in which they don't mind if a PI, some foundations don't mind if a PI best strategies for figuring out, I mean, aside from going to Foundation Relations, if they say, oh, we don't have a relationship with them, do you have any tips on how someone should approach a foundation?
And are you talking
Initially.
specifically a private foundation?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, first of all, you want to scan, take a look. It's not hard to take a look at what their the tax returns of private foundations are available online. And they'll show all of the grants that they gave. They'll show who's on their board. So you can say, well, is there anybody on that board who has an interest that's related to what my interest is? That can give you a personal connection, but you want to find people who are funding the kinds of things that you're interested in. Then you want to go talk to them about it. Before you ever have an idea in mind, before you ever have a project in mind, go on and say, talk to me about, I know you've been working in this particular area. How's that been working for you? What have you learned from that? How can we benefit from what you've been learning? Get them involved in the discussion, get them involved in relationship building. Then talk about what you're doing and ask how what you're doing can be helpful to them. When you get to that point, you cross that transit into a more strategic kind of focus, that's when they'll be very forthcoming. Before that, they're going to be very aloof.
Yeah, and I'm wondering when too, if you do, it is a situation where I would initiate the relationship. At what point should I bring in the university, or, you know, because I can understand some want to work just with that person, some would want to work through the institution. The university, if there's money involved, they're going to prefer us to go through them
Of course.
because they want credit, and especially the foundation's office, they want credit for it too.
They also have their own competing sets of priorities.
So.
So, if there's money to be developed, right, maybe they've got a capital project that they would really like to get funded. Maybe it's a new football stadium instead of your
Yeah.
research project.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no particular magic about how to do this, but one of the things that I've always thought about, and university development offices do this really, really well. Ask yourself, who do you know who has influence with the people that you want to talk to in that private foundation? Don't overplay that, because private foundations are, based on my research, notorious at resisting external influence. You just want to use somebody that they're open to, that they have a positive relationship with, that you have a positive relationship with, to start the dialogue. And be patient. Once you get to that place where you start kicking this off into actual grant activity, it begins to take a life of its own. Think about that path model and how that works. But you really, really have to be patient, and you don't go in with an idea to propose to begin with. Go in to have conversation. Go in to pick their brain, develop the relationship, and then you can go back at some point in time and say, when we were talking about X, you expressed an interest of the following. Did I understand that correctly? Well, guess what? We just happen to be doing this, and I wonder if you'd like to be a participant in this. That's the way to work with private foundations. Questions?
So you were talking about when your firm brings on a superstar, and to make sure that you have an intervention that would kind of quail that person. Do you have any particular interventions in mind that you're
Yeah.
talking about?
Now you're getting into my healthcare turnaround background. I've had several careers, and I used to turn around failed healthcare firms and hospitals. And inevitably, there's always somebody in that context who is a superstar. First of all, you want to build a really strong culture, right? And a strong culture communicates respect to everybody in an organization. That's one of the things we want to talk about tonight. Such that the culture itself is strong enough to be able to resist any negative influence that might come from somebody who's not as given to participating in that culture. The next thing is I really believe in the spirit of intentionality. In my drug and alcohol career, a long time, we developed an award-winning advertisement. It was a great advertisement that nobody got. But we won all kinds of awards for it. Here's this ad. It's a family in a living room, and guess what? In the middle of the living room, an elephant. And the mother picks up the trunk, talking to one of the kids over here, one of the kids picks up the tail over here to talk, but nobody acknowledges the elephant in the room, right? And what we were trying to do was talk about denial. Okay? And we got all these awards for this this ad, but again, nobody got it. Well, why would they have an elephant in the room? It doesn't make any sense. But there's always an elephant in the room organization, and to talk to that person about, you know, you're coming in and you're a real superstar. Well, we really need you to be helpful to our environment. We need you to be a coach. We need you to be a motivator. Sometimes people need to be taken to an obvious place where you can talk them through the role that you need them to play. There's a concept in literature called sense making, and it's a really critical key in terms of leadership strategy. How do you help people in the organization make sense about what your needs are, where things are going, even how resources are allocated, how your activities fit your mission, what individual and collective roles are with respect to all of that. The more you can talk that out intentionally, the more likely you are to be successful. We were in the virtual reality lab today talking about, you know, triggers. And in the drug and alcohol environment, families have, while intending to be helpful, if you ask a family who had somebody who in their family was drug and alcohol addicted, do you want them to recover? They would say, of course. And then they would do a series of things that are destructive to that person's recovery. You have to be able to talk about what's that about. There is a process at every organization called homeostasis. Okay? It's a physiological process. You know, every day we lose every surface cell of our face, and yet we wake up the next morning. And for some of us, to our chagrin, we look in the mirror, we look the same. You know, I go, wait, if I'm going to lose every surface cell, I'll at least look a little bit more like Robert Redford. You know? But that's not how it is. There's this process of stasis, this homeostasis. One keeps things the same. Why? Because it creates predictability, right? And it's a subconscious level of activity. People have to be confronted to move out of that homeostatic behavior, to move into a different level. I happen to believe that percent or better of the people on the board would be inclined to do better things if they really understood the consequences of what they're doing. They would be inclined to do better. How do you appeal to that? By telling them the effect of what they're doing and where the opportunity is to be able to have a better effect. Then, if they can't do that, you need to move on. Either move them on or find a way to insulate them. You know, create a whole bunch of white blood cells around them where they can't quite get out of that, and just keep them separated from the rest of the group. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you have a list of the private foundations that you are aware of that would fund universities' programs?
You know, I don't. And I don't know that anybody really does. And there are lots of people who sell you lists. And those lists are based on tax returns. So they go out and they essentially do a data mining to find what foundations have funded what. And I'm always amused when I read what my foundation will allegedly fund based on those lists. Every foundation is unique. There are no two foundations that are exactly alike. Private foundations, particularly corporate foundations, and other foundations tend to have a lot more similarities. But small to medium-sized private foundations are highly unique. And what's in addition to that, I mean, you're looking at what they've done in the past as somehow being a predictor of what they'll do in the future. And it may be that what they did in the past was based on legacy relationships and not interest. Remember that they'll sometimes do grants that aren't necessarily the grants they wanted to do because they have a strategic relationship and they wanted to be supportive of that strategic grant too. So it's far better to go in and spend the time getting to know them, private foundations that are in your particular area, and find out who has the interests that align with your interests, and then find a way to be able to communicate in their vernacular so that they can see that what you're interested in is what they would be interested in. Sure.
If you go to United Way, do they have the foundation
But they don't do it by types of, like, I think that similar to Bob just said that, I mean, it may not be all at all be
Oh, yeah.
categorized according to the group or the surface or research interest.
Well, they do.
They
I mean,
do?
Yeah, if you put a keyword, they just list, but of course you have to go each one of them and do more research. And see that they even list that they type of brands they buy. So it will give you a better idea.
And then you need somebody on the inside who can help you make the connection.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, because
That's
they
the
give you
real challenge.
the name of the board of directors and everything. So that's a great tool that is available.
Humana has far more experience on the grantee side than I do. The last time that I had experience as a grantee was in 1984. And I know some of you weren't born yet. So, that gives you an idea how limited my experience is on the grantee side, other than my research. But the Foundation Center is a great resource. But Luis is right. You still have to make the personal connection. If you want to be involved with private foundations, you have to create a personal connection. There's no automatic formula beyond that pathway that will get you there.
And that could be a real challenge for us at a university. One of the things that you're all going to learn about is that, I don't like the term, but it's a term that's used. Universities and other agencies as well, they have what they call relationship managers, right? So here in the UH structure, even if I know the president of the Episcopal Health Foundation, I can't go to her and sit down and say, hey, we have this idea, we're wondering if you'd be interested in it. I have to go through certain channels. So sometimes there's two levels of communication that are going on simultaneously. If you're the person who knows the person in the foundation, you're having an unofficial conversation with them. And then the university is pursuing a more official conversation with them. So you got to be mindful of that as well. And there are some good reasons for that. I mean, there are sometimes, one of the things that they'll tell us, faculty in particular, they'll say, you may approach somebody and ask them about their interest in funding a very small project that you're involved with, when the university was working on a much broader scope that was going to benefit not just you, but several colleges, and so there are often legitimate reasons for that, but it does create the need to be very careful when and how you approach people and what you say, and so keep that in mind. Those of you that are headed to faculty positions or are already working in university settings.
We just funded a building called the Maddox Engineering Research Center at Texas Tech University. Not in our grant-making region. We don't fund in Texas, but we fund it. And I get a lot of calls from people at Texas Tech University who don't know the relationship, saying, well, we'd really like to talk to you about this or that. The reason why we funded that is because our founder was in the first graduating class of engineers from Texas Tech. Okay? So it was a legacy grant-making opportunity, and we wanted to see the family's name on a major prominent building on that campus on the engineering key. Okay? How do you replicate that? You don't, right? But I can always tell who has the potential to be a strategic grantee versus who doesn't. The person who doesn't will call and say, I wanted to explain to you how what we do really fits your grant-making criteria. And I can tell that they're in a tell and sell mode. When I have somebody who comes in and says, boy, we really want to understand what you do, talk to us about what you do. What have you learned in that regard? And what are you really interested in? And that's fascinating to us. We're really excited about what you're doing in that particular area, and we want to learn more about that. And they don't have a project in mind. They're building a relationship. Then eventually, that gets crossed over either because they make an ask, or because we get so enamored with, well, why haven't you asked for anything? That's an odd position to be in, right? There have been times we've actually gone and made a grant where they didn't even ask for the grant because they had advanced into that status of being a strategic grantee.
I have a question from the grantee point of view, and I'm going to ask on behalf of our MSW students. So there's a lot of MSW students sitting around the room, and many of them are macro students. And I think I shared this with Dr. Reed in one of our conversations. And I've been connected to social work now for about 25 years. And if I had $100 for every macro social work student that I've asked, why do you want to be a social worker, who has responded, I want to start my own nonprofit, I would have enough money to endow my own nonprofit. So they all want to start their own companies. And so, you know, and as a faculty member, that you try to, you don't want to discourage them, but you want to provide some alternative views on that. So what's your take on it? What do you say to those budding macro social workers that can't wait to get out of here and graduate and go start their own nonprofit organization?
You know, I earned my MBA in Silicon Valley, one of the most entrepreneurial places in the country. Almost everybody that I was in class with was looking at starting their own IT company. There is nothing in the world wrong with having the ambition to start something that you think creates value. One of the questions that I'm going to get asked tonight is, because I've managed for-profit companies and non-profit organizations, how does what I do different? And the answer is it doesn't. It's the same. If I don't create value, you know, organizations are in the business of solving problems. An organization that ceases to solve problems becomes a problem, right? Okay. So I think it's wonderful to have people who have ambition to be social entrepreneurs, that want to create entities that do good. But for every 10 that come up with an idea, one is likely to actually bring it into reality. That doesn't mean you didn't do good on the process of trying to advocate for ideas and to try to propose initiatives. Your role may be to actually hand the ball off to somebody else who runs it for a touchdown. Okay? And there is a lot of value in that as well. So I would encourage everyone to pursue your dreams. One of the questions we asked tonight is about what's really important for advancing your career. And my view is there is nothing more important for advancing your career than passion. Matching your activities with what you're most passionate about and not getting distracted by whether or not that is financially rewarding or whether it creates status or anything else that in my view is an artifact of success. Real success. My grandfather, how many people know who Mickey Rooney was? Mickey Rooney was my grandfather's best friend. I grew up with an adopted grandfather who was in the motion picture business for 40 years. And he used to say, a successful person is a person who does what they really want to do for a living. He didn't ever measure that in terms of money. He didn't measure that in terms of fame. He didn't measure that in any other artificial dimension. My grandfather was such an individualist that late in life, he was a little bit of a problem. He had several girlfriends. He had one in China, one in Tokyo, one in Egypt, one in London, 3 or 4 in Southern California, and this guy was 84 years old. Donald Trump talks about stamina. I'm telling you, he has no idea what stamina is compared to my grandfather. My grandfather went to a black tie dinner in Tokyo with the president and CEO of Arby's roast beef. And my grandfather said he retired, he would never wear a tie again. He went all over Tokyo until he found a tuxedo printed t-shirt, and he wore it to that black tie dinner. That's the kind of rugged individualist he was. And he really helped ground me to what's really important. So if you have a passion, don't let anybody else tell you that your passion isn't somehow valuable. But listen to how they can help refine that passion, how they can give you greater clarity about how to move forward, how they can connect you with other people who can help you get things done. I was introducing a former governor of New Mexico at the University of Texas at the Permian Basin once. And before I got to introduce him, I was back behind the stage and I was talking with this president of UTBB. And we were talking about how all of us are inadequate. If I feel inadequate, it's because I am. Here's the really neat thing. I was never intended to be adequate of and by myself. And he said something I'll never forget, and I always give him attribution. Show me a person who can say, I am a self-made person of and by my own efforts, and I will show you somebody who mortally sacrificed their potential. We need each other in order to be able to achieve our biggest dreams. And we only realize our dreams as a result of tapping into the resources that other people can provide us. So don't be dissuaded away from your passion, but listen to what other people have to say, because they may actually help you achieve it.
Well, I think that that's a beautiful way to close. I know the students have to get to their 1 o'clock classes, and we both have to get to our next commitment. So let's give Dr. Reed a round of applause.